Flying into aviation history, powered by just the rays of the sun. Solar Impulse 2 sets records and the imagination racing. The promise, the possibilities and the practicalities of renewable energy. This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Shiulie Ghosh. It's one of the world's cleanest and most abundant renewable energy sources, and a record-breaking flight using electricity produced from the sun is showcasing just what's possible using solar power. The accomplishment marks the latest leg of a round-the-world mission by two Swiss explorers to promote the promise of clean technology. Here's their journey to date. Solar Impulse 2 took off from Abu Dhabi on the 9th of March. Its flight around the globe took it first to Oman. Then it was on to Ahmedabad in India, setting the record for the longest single manned solar-powered flight. Then on to Varanasi. After a brief stop, it continued to Mandalay in Myanmar. On this leg, it set another world record for the fastest manned solar-powered flight, clocking 216 kilometres an hour. From there, while flying over the mountainous area towards Chongqing in China, the cabin temperatures dropped to as low as -20 Celsius. Then Solar Impulse flew on to Nanjing, where pilot André Borschberg prepared for the most challenging leg of the journey yet, across the Pacific Ocean. Bad weather forced an unscheduled stop in Nagoya in Japan, but Solar Impulse took off again on Sunday, completing its historic flight to Hawaii on Friday. And more world records for the distance covered for a manned solar-powered flight, 7,212 kilometres. For the time spent in the air, 4 days, 21 hours and 52 minutes. And setting an absolute record for a solo, unrefuelled journey. Gerald Tan has more on this remarkable achievement.
A graceful glide into history. The Solar Impulse 2 lands in Hawaii after 120 hours of flying. Pilot André Borschberg could express only elation after his journey across the Pacific, now the longest solo flight on record. Incredible! This wasn't just a feat of time, but also one of science. Borschberg flew the plane without a drop of fuel. The Solar Impulse 2 is powered by the sun. It has 17,000 solar cells that can charge batteries to keep it going through the night. The journey tested the endurance of the vessel and that of the pilot, who didn't have much room to move in the cockpit and was allowed only 20-minute naps.
I think I was privileged to be able to do this flight. It was an extraordinary experience, but above all, also it's the demonstration that this technology works.
Borschberg and fellow Swiss pilot Bertrand Piccard have been taking turns flying the Solar Impulse 2 around the world since March. It's the culmination of a 12-year project that aims to highlight the potential of solar energy.
This is why today it's a historic first for aviation and a historic first for renewable energies. Nobody now can say that renewable energies cannot do the impossible.
The Solar Impulse 2 heads now from Honolulu to Phoenix as it continues to break ground in the air. Gerald Tan, Al Jazeera.
It's a great achievement, isn't it? Let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Canberra is Klaus Weber, an Associate Professor in the Centre for Sustainable Energy Systems at Australian National University. And in Oxford, Douglas Parr, a Policy Director at Greenpeace. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. Klaus, let me start with you. What do you think of this then? The longest flight by a plane with or without fuel?
Well, it's a wonderful achievement, and congratulations to the pilots and everyone involved in that team. And I think it highlights that solar energy really has come of age and is ready and will make a significant contribution to energy generation, electricity generation around the globe. And of course, we are already seeing the beginnings of that, and we're just going to see that trend accelerate.
Yeah, you're very much involved in solar technology. I mean, what are the possibilities of solar technology? How far could it take us?
Well, looking at the main issue that we want to address with solar technology, so the burning issue, of course, is climate change, but there are other issues as well that we want to address, such as poverty, energy poverty, and issues of equality or inequality around the world. And solar energy really can play a major role in tackling all of these issues, which is not to understate the scale of the problems that we face, particularly with climate change. But solar energy has demonstrated, we have demonstrated now that we can get the costs to a level where indeed we can generate a significant fraction of the world's electricity demand with solar energy within the next few decades.
Douglas, do you agree with this? Projects like the Solar Impulse flight really bring a focus to what is possible with solar energy and other renewable forms of energy.
Absolutely. I agree with Klaus there, and I agree with the general direction of travel that we've got with renewables, particularly solar power, and how much that it has the potential to transform the way the world gets its energy. And I think the great thing about things like Solar Impulse is it brings a highlight to it, because those who are close to it can see the changes starting to unfold and the changes that are likely to come, and they are going to be radical and profound, and things like Solar Impulse do highlight it. Just researching this subject, there are some amazing projects that are going on. And then the Netherlands, for example, the world's first bike path paved with solar panels was set up last year, Douglas, and it's already generating 3,000 kilowatt hours. I mean, if you think of extending that to road systems in Europe, that would be an amazing source of energy. Yeah. Well, absolutely, and I think what we're seeing is that the decreasing cost of solar panels, innovation in terms of manufacturing and deployment, is bringing the cost down such that it's cheaper than the conventional fossil fuels and nuclear that have been powering at least developed countries' grid systems over, well, a century or so. But now that's changing because those costs are shifting so much that it just makes more sense to be investing in different in these alternative technologies. And you see actually quite a lot of the banks are realizing that. The banks who have to advise their clients, who are investors in utilities, they're now just starting to advise their clients to stay away from old-fashioned power systems. UBS Bank, the largest private bank in the world, for example, said that the old centralized power stations, like coal-fired power stations, are going to be redundant or at least heading for extinction in the next 10 to 20 years, particularly because of solar and because of other technologies like storage, demand response, and proper connections between previously isolated spaces in the power system. So as I say, there's this tremendous change that's about to unfold in the energy system, and those close to it can actually see it starting to happen already. Well,
you've both spoken about costs. Klaus, the problem is that renewable energy is not associated with good economy. It's more expensive to produce renewable energy than it is to rely on the old fossil fuels and nuclear energy. So how do we change perceptions of using renewable energy as making good economic sense?
Well, to a large extent, those perceptions have shifted already. So, for example, in Australia, we have the situation where putting a solar panel on your roof makes absolute economic sense because the electricity from that panel will be cheaper than the electricity from the grid. And of course, people realize that and are very keen to buy solar panels.
But in terms of big business, Klaus, in terms of big business, with the exception of hydroelectric power, renewable energy sources cost between 2 and 5 times what fossil fuel and nuclear energy costs. So that really means that only rich countries can afford them, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't, because for starters, you have to be very careful how you do the calculations of cost. And one of the important factors is that fossil fuels are usually not costed properly, because externalities are almost never included in the cost that consumers pay. So there was a recent report by IMF that attempted to recalculate the actual subsidies received by fossil fuels. And the figure they arrived at was rather staggering. It was in excess of $5 trillion per year. Now, if you work out what that means in terms of how much you're subsidizing each kilowatt hour of electricity, and you then compare that to the cost of solar energy, for example, or wind energy, you get a rather different answer than if you do not include these externalities. And the problem with externalities is that they can be quite difficult to cost, but that is no reason not to cost them.
Okay.
In fact, it's rather stupid to keep those externalities out.
I can see Douglas nodding. You obviously agree with Carl.
Yeah. It's absolutely true that the externalities aren't costed, but it's also important to recognise that the costs are changing so rapidly on things like solar and storage that if you take costings done well 2 or 3 years ago, I mean, they're just out of date. They're junk paper. They're due for recycling. So I mean, just even last year, another one of the major banks, Deutsche Bank, said that that in 35 of the US states, even when there's a drop in the tax credit that that solar would get, it would still be simply cost effective to stick it on the top of your building and stop using the power from the grid. UBS have also said that even in somewhere around Central Europe, if you put, say, by the end of this decade, so by 2020, an electric car, a lot of solar and batteries in your basement are going to be cost effective. They're just going to be better value than the conventional ways of doing things. So what we're seeing is not simply, the important thing is not to compare static costs of 2 or 3 years ago and expectations then, but to think about what's happening, because those costs are coming down and down and down, and they are going to render the kind of cost benefit analysis or cost analysis even a couple of years ago completely redundant.
Okay, gentlemen, we've managed to get hold of Raymond Clerc. He's the Solar Impulse Mission Director. So let's bring him into the show. Raymond, I know you're very busy right now, but congratulations on your achievement. How are the team feeling?
Well, the team feeling is great. We were trying to organize this flight since years. We spoke since years with André, especially about is it possible or so. And then we were in Japan, we were blocked there, and really it was difficult to keep faith, to stay focused, because finally we thought, are we able to do it? Is the aircraft able to do it? And now it's done, and this is really fantastic, because now we know we can make the rest of around the world. We don't know the schedule because the weather will be one of the main issue, but to have this success yesterday and the days before is really great. So we had a great party yesterday evening.
I bet you did. So how much do you think this project is bringing the focus back onto renewable energy and clean technologies?
Well, I think it's proves by achieving this very long flight that renewable energies are very good. It just need to be investigated and put in the systems together by good engineering, and then you have the results. And this is the best demonstration. Something which everybody thought it's impossible, now it's done only with solar energy. So this is really great.
But you don't see this as the future of aviation, do you? I mean, the flight was very slow, and you said yourself the technology is susceptible to weather conditions.
Yeah, I think it's not, the idea is not to prove that in 50 years we'll have big aircraft flying only on solar energy, but we never know what will happen. I think for general aviation, aircraft for 4 people during the day, it's completely possible to have, like we have now, electrical cars, to have electrical aircraft with solar cells to be recharged. Normally those flights, they last 3-4 hours in a day. So you go for a dinner or a lunch in Corsica, you come back. So it will be possible. And this is the future for general aviation. For big aircraft, I don't know, but it's not the idea of Bertrand Piccard to make this for big aircraft. It's the idea to have the message about renewable energy, to apply them all over in our system, in our houses and so on.
So you talk about the importance of renewable energy and the fact that more investigation is needed. Why do you think there isn't more focus on this?
I don't know exactly, but I think the people are afraid that if we use renewable energy, we have to reduce our comfort. But it's absolutely not the case, and I think it's a must to use them to save the future, because we cannot continue like we are doing now, using everything. And if you see what is happening in the oceans, also it's a big problem. So it's a general philosophy, it's a general way of life that everybody has to adapt. And when I'm traveling, I see everywhere now more eolians or a lot of solar cells also in countries where they have a lot of suns. And it's a pity that in some country with a lot of sun, it's not yet understood, but it will come for sure.
Raymond, thanks very much for that. We're going to have to let him go because he is so busy. One of the interesting things that the Solar Impulse team says on its website is that promoting renewable energy is largely the province of ecologists and fringe political parties. Why is it not more mainstream?
Well, it's interesting because actually I think solar energy is understood by the average person in the street much better than most politicians and decision makers give them credit for. So most surveys show that solar energy is extremely popular, certainly here in Australia, but also elsewhere around the world. And most people want to see much more solar energy. And what is usually holding back progress is the political will. And that's, of course, partly tempered by the fact that we have got incumbents. We've got a fossil fuel industry. We've got electricity generators who have a business model that has evolved over many years. They have assets, and they're, of course, keen to see their business continue to prosper. And so this is, I think, really the challenge. It's not so much getting the public on side. I think, by and large, the public understands reasonably well what solar energy can do. It's a matter of turning the chip around and changing the momentum at the political level.
Do you agree with that, Douglas? That the issue is trying to get over entrenched interests so that the environment can be put first for once?
Oh, completely agree. Yeah, no, that's the Klaus is quite right. It's going to be the challenge to the business models that I think is going to be the fight for the ecology and environment movement to come, because the costs are going to demonstrate things for themselves once people realise, as they will do quite rapidly, about the cost effectiveness of this stuff. Then it's going to be about making sure that the systems and the businesses are not allowed to use their lobbying muscle to get in the way. So we see contrasting approaches within Europe to solar power, where in Germany the government is still very much behind it. In Spain, for example, the government has kind of pulled back from deployment of solar, even though it's now cost effective, and instead of supporting it, are now effectively taxing it to try and stop solar taking off and challenging the existing business model and the existing grids. So when we see great big conferences
like the United Nations Climate Change Conference, and I know that there's obviously one coming up in December this year in Paris, and you know, clean energy groups go there and put their case. What is this just being ignored? Is nothing being done about this?
Well, I think what we're seeing is that there's different level of commitments in different places, and you know, it's no longer just a rich person's thing. Of the commitments that have been made for that Paris conference, the biggest commitment on cutting emissions is not coming from what you might call the progressive developed countries. It's coming from Ethiopia at the moment. Ethiopia, who's actually recognised that wind, we haven't spoken much about that, but wind and solar will be a much better provider for its country's needs than the old-fashioned fossil model. So what we're seeing is that some governments are kind of getting there and seeing the opportunities, whereas others are quite old and entrenched in their ways. I work in the UK. I know that there are some pretty entrenched views within government, frankly old-fashioned last century views about what renewable energy is able to deliver. And you still have to try and get over that and get them to recognise that there's a tremendous opportunity, but it means recasting the way in which our power market works to allow that to happen, rather than having bureaucracy getting in the way.
Let me read you this quote from the International Energy Agency. In its World Energy Outlook of 2013, the IEA said today's share of fossil fuels in the global mix at 82% is the same as it was 25 years ago. The strong rise of renewables only reduces this to around 75% in 2035. Klaus, that's a bit depressing, isn't it?
Well, so this is one scenario, and that's basically what they've described there is the business as usual scenario. So this is a scenario assuming that there are no major changes at the political level. And that is a scenario that is also consistent with a temperature rise much above 2 degrees Celsius, which the international community has agreed is really what we should be aiming for if we want to have a reasonable chance of avoiding very serious adverse effects from climate change.
Okay, but the United Nations also says that the world demand for energy is going to increase by 40% in the next 20 years. Can renewable energy sources keep up with that?
Technically, absolutely. So this is the question. One of the nice things about renewable energy is that it's very easy to scale up and to increase and to ramp up production of renewable energy, because there are very few safety and legislative hurdles in the way, and hurdles in the way of, for example, lack of skilled labor. So really, once again, the challenge comes down to initiating this cultural shift at every level, at the level of business and at the level of political decision makers, which is very difficult because it's not the kind of thing that politicians and business people usually have to deal with.
Indeed. Douglas, some countries have started to invest in clean energy. I believe Denmark is producing 43% of its energy from renewables. Germany, something like 30%. How do we build on that? How do you talked about political will. Where does that political will come from?
Well, it comes, and the sort of Greenpeace expectation is that it has to come from political pressure at the bottom. It's from people who want to see the change happen. And as Klaus said quite rightly, you know, if you look at almost any country in the world, you'll find that the most popular and most wanted kind of energy people want to see is renewable energy. So there's no shortage of desire there for people to put pressure on their governments to make sure this change happens. So I think what will change, and why I'm not depressed about climate change, because you're quite right about the statistics that you said. You know, the IEA do not think, that the International Energy Agency don't think there's going to be a rapid transition. But I think what can change is when suddenly, as we will see in the next few years, solar or wind, which is already cheaper than in fossil fuels in Brazil, when it becomes the logical investment to make, irrespective of environmental considerations, it's just the logical way to spend your money, then we'll start to see a tipping point which makes that change happen much, much more quickly. If you have models and scenarios that assume you have to keep paying out money to support renewable energy, then it's always going to look like the transition is going to be slow. But when that tipping point comes, then I hope we will find the transition happens a lot quicker, and then it's about getting governments and old-fashioned business interests out of the way to allow it to happen.
So we can look forward to a greener future, hopefully. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining today's discussion. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. Klaus Weber in Canberra, Douglas Parr in Oxford, and earlier on Raymond Clerc, who joined us via Skype from Monaco. And thank you to at home for watching. If you want to add to today's conversation, you can just go to our website, aljazeera.com/programmes, or you can post on our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet us at AJ Inside Story. Until next time, from all of us here, bye for now.